The crisp autumn air swept across the tarmac of Van Nuys Airport, the exclusive gateway for Hollywood's elite into the skies above Los Angeles. Private jets gleamed under the California sun like polished jewels, their sleek fuselages reflecting wealth and privilege. Among the immaculate fleet of aircraft stood the crown jewel of Excellence Aviation's hangar, a custom Gulfstream G650 with interiors rumored to cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. Standing beside this mechanical masterpiece was Julian Mercer, Excellence Aviation's newest client relations manager, his tailored Armani suit as spotless as his meticulously maintained LinkedIn profile. At 32, Julian had clawed his way to this position through a combination of relentless networking, an MBA from Wharton, and a carefully cultivated persona that whispered old money even though he'd grown up solidly middle class in Fresno. Today marked his second week handling elite-tier clients, celebrities, tech billionaires, and old money families who thought nothing of dropping six figures on a cross-country flight. Julian checked his Patek Philippe watch, a graduation gift he'd stretched his credit limit to afford, and scanned the approaching figures walking across the tarmac. The manifest indicated client KR 7754 would be arriving for the 2:30 p.m. departure to New York. Excellence Aviation's protocol required Julian to know everything about his VIP clients, from their beverage preferences to their security concerns, but this particular client had minimal notes in the system, just a dietary preference, vegetarian, and a note about extreme privacy requirements. As the approaching party drew closer, Julian's practiced smile faltered slightly. Three people approached: a nondescript man in a black suit who was clearly security, a woman with a tablet who looked like a personal assistant, and trailing slightly behind them, a figure that made Julian's professional assessment kick into high gear. The man wore faded jeans that had seen better days, scuffed work boots that hadn't been polished in what looked like years, and a plain black t-shirt under an olive green utility jacket that belonged in an army surplus store, not on a private jet tarmac. His dark hair was shoulder-length and slightly unkempt, partially hidden under a worn baseball cap pulled low. A patchy beard covered the lower half of his face, and he carried a battered backpack slung over one shoulder. Julian's smile tightened as he quickly recalculated his approach. Clearly, this was some assistant or technician accompanying the actual client. Perhaps the real VIP was running late. No elite-tier client would ever present themselves this way. Not at Excellence Aviation, where image was paramount, and clients typically dressed to match the luxury they were purchasing. "Good afternoon and welcome to Excellence Aviation," Julian called out as the group approached, directing his greeting primarily toward the suited security personnel and the assistant with the tablet. "I'm Julian Mercer, your client relations manager for today's journey. I'll be ensuring everything meets your expectations." The security man gave a curt nod but said nothing. The woman with the tablet smiled professionally. "Hi, I'm Sarah, Mr. Reeves' assistant. We spoke on the phone yesterday about the arrangements." Julian nodded, the name registering somewhere in his consciousness but not fully connecting. There were countless producers, directors, and entertainment executives with familiar names in Los Angeles. "Of course, Sarah, everything has been arranged according to your specifications. The aircraft is fully prepared and waiting." Julian gestured toward the stunning Gulfstream. "If you'd like to let Mr. Reeves know we're ready when he arrives, we can begin the boarding process for his staff." The casually dressed man stepped forward with a gentle smile that transformed his entire face. "That's very kind of you. I'm Keanu. Thank you for accommodating us on short notice." Julian blinked, his brain refusing to process the information for several seconds. This couldn't be right. This man in worn jeans and a jacket that looked like it had survived multiple apocalypses couldn't possibly be. But as Julian studied the man's face more carefully, recognition began to dawn. Behind the casual beard and beneath the low-pulled cap were the unmistakable features of Keanu Reeves, star of The Matrix, John Wick, and dozens of other blockbusters, one of Hollywood's most bankable actors for decades. Julian quickly recalibrated, though his voice betrayed his surprise. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize. I didn't recognize you. Welcome to Excellence Aviation." Keanu smiled again, the expression reaching his eyes. No need for apologies. I appreciate the greeting. But Julian was already spiraling internally. He had just committed the cardinal sin of luxury service. He had judged a client based on appearance and had been embarrassingly transparent about it. Worse still, he had done so with Keanu Reeves, who, despite his fame and estimated net worth of over $400 million, was widely known in Hollywood circles for his humility and down-to-earth nature. "Please, allow me to show you to the aircraft," Julian said, his professional demeanor snapping back into place with military precision. "We've prepared everything according to your preferences." As they walked toward the jet, Julian found himself babbling nervously about the aircraft's features. The G650 offers the largest cabin in its class, with a maximum ceiling of 51,000 feet, allowing for smoother air and shorter flight times. The cabin is pressurized at 3,000 feet rather than the standard 8,000, reducing fatigue. We've stocked your preferred Japanese green tea and the vegetarian meal options you requested. Keanu nodded politely, but seemed more interested in greeting the ground crew personnel they passed. He stopped to shake hands with a mechanic who was clearly startled by the interaction. "How long have you been working on these aircraft?" Keanu asked the mechanic. 17 years, sir," the mechanic replied, clearly surprised to be acknowledged. "That's impressive," Keanu said with genuine interest. "Must take real dedication." Julian stood awkwardly to the side, watching this unexpected exchange. When they finally continued toward the aircraft, Julian attempted to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Reeves, we've prepared the aft cabin as a private workspace as requested. The main cabin is configured for your team. Our in-flight service specialist, Amara, has been briefed on your preferences and will ensure your comfort throughout the journey." As they approached the air stairs, Julian gestured for Keanu to board first, but the actor stepped back. "After you," he said, motioning for Sarah and the security personnel to precede him. Julian hesitated, professional protocol warring with social courtesy. "Sir, as our honored guest, you should—" "I insist," Keanu said softly but firmly. Julian nodded and ascended the stairs behind Sarah and the security team, with Keanu following last. The interior of the jet gleamed with luxury: hand-stitched leather seats, polished wood surfaces, and crystal glassware secured in custom holders. Amara, the flight attendant, stood ready with a professional smile and perfect posture. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reeves," she said warmly. "Is there anything I can offer you before takeoff?" "Just water would be great, thank you." Keanu replied with a nod of appreciation. Julian watched this interaction closely, mentally noting Amara's appropriate recognition of their high-profile client despite his casual appearance. He felt a renewed sting of embarrassment at his own failure. As Keanu settled into one of the plush seats, Julian hovered nearby, determined to recover from his initial misstep. "Mr. Reeves, I must apologize again for the confusion outside. Excellence Aviation prides itself on personalized service and recognition of our valued clients. I should have been better prepared." Keanu looked up, appearing genuinely puzzled by Julian's continued discomfort. "There's really no need for apologies. I'm not exactly dressed for recognition." He gestured at his casual attire with a self-deprecating smile. "Nevertheless," Julian pressed, "it was unprofessional. As a token of our regret, I'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade to our Platinum Experience package, which includes rare vintage wines and our exclusive caviar service during your flight." Keanu shook his head gently. "That's very generous, but unnecessary. I don't drink alcohol during flights, and I mentioned I'm vegetarian." Julian felt his face flush hot with embarrassment. Of course, the dietary preference noted in the file. Another misstep. "Of course, sir. Perhaps our premium tea service instead? We feature rare harvests from—" "Really?" Keanu interrupted gently. "The standard service will be perfect. Please don't trouble yourself." Julian nodded stiffly, feeling increasingly wrong-footed. Most elite-tier clients would have accepted the upgrade offer immediately, viewing it as their due for any perceived slight. Keanu's refusal only heightened Julian's sense of having misread the situation entirely. As the pre-flight preparations continued, Julian retreated to the galley area where Amara was organizing the service items for the flight. "That's Keanu Reeves," he whispered, still processing the disconnect between the casually dressed man and his celebrity status. Amara nodded, seeming unsurprised by Julian's reaction. He's flown with us before, always the same, minimal requests, extremely polite to everyone, the complete opposite of most clients in his bracket. Julian frowned slightly. But he's worth hundreds of millions. You'd never know it by looking at him. Amara gave him a measured look. That's exactly what makes him different. Some of our clients spend more on a weekend's worth of clothes than most people earn in a year, and they want everyone to know it. Mr. Reeves could buy this entire aircraft if he wanted to, but he doesn't care about showing off. This perspective only increased Julian's discomfort. Throughout his career in luxury services, he'd been trained to identify wealth and status through visible markers. Designer clothing, fine watches, certain postures and mannerisms that subtly communicated a person's position in the social hierarchy. He'd become expert at detecting the difference between old money quietness and nouveau riche flamboyance, between inherited privilege and earned success. Keanu Reeves defied all these categorizations, rendering Julian's carefully honed professional skills useless. Determined to recover, Julian returned to the main cabin where Keanu was now engaged in quiet conversation with his assistant Sarah. As Julian approached, he overheard them discussing charitable donations to a children's hospital, not the typical pre-flight conversation he was accustomed to hearing from celebrity clients. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves," Julian interrupted with practiced smoothness. "The captain has informed me that we're cleared for departure and will be taking off in approximately 15 minutes. Is there anything additional you require before we're airborne?" Keanu looked up with that same calm smile that seemed to diffuse tension effortlessly. "We're all set, thank you." Julian nodded and turned to leave when Keanu spoke again. "Actually, if you don't mind, I'm curious about something." Julian pivoted immediately, his professional attentiveness kicking into high gear. "Yes, sir? How long have you been working with Excellence Aviation?" The question caught Julian off guard. Clients rarely expressed interest in staff beyond requesting specific services. "Just under 2 years, sir. I transferred from the Peninsula Beverly Hills Hotel's VIP Services division." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "And do you enjoy the work?" Julian blinked, momentarily unsure how to respond to such a direct, personal question from a client. Yes, very much so. Excellence Aviation represents the pinnacle of private aviation services, and I'm privileged to work with our distinguished clientele." The response came out sounding rehearsed, which it partially was. Julian had used similar phrasing during his job interview. Keanu seemed to detect this and tilted his head slightly. "But what about the work itself? Does it fulfill you?" Julian felt unexpectedly exposed, as though Keanu had somehow seen through the carefully constructed professional facade he presented to clients. The truth was more complicated than his polished answer suggested. Julian enjoyed the proximity to wealth and fame, the reflected glow of moving among society's elite. The actual work, managing the often unreasonable demands of entitled clients, was frequently exhausting and sometimes demeaning. "I find great satisfaction in providing exceptional service," Julian said carefully, ensuring that clients experience luxury without complication or concern. Keanu nodded slowly, seeming to consider this answer. "That makes sense. Creating smooth experiences for others is meaningful work." There was no condescension in his tone, no hint that he detected Julian's partial evasion, just simple acknowledgement that made Julian feel strangely seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly refreshing. The aircraft began to taxi toward the runway, and Julian excused himself to take his seat for takeoff. As he buckled his seatbelt in the crew area, he found himself replaying the interaction in his mind. Something about Keanu's direct gaze and gentle questioning had left him feeling vaguely unsettled, as though the actor had briefly punctured the bubble of artifice that Julian normally operated within. Once they reached cruising altitude, Julian resumed his duties, checking with Amara about the service and ensuring everything proceeded according to protocol. When he returned to the main cabin to check on their VIP guest, he found Keanu reading a dog-eared paperback rather than working on a laptop or scrolling through a phone like most clients. "May I ask what you're reading, Mr. Reeves?" Julian inquired, genuinely curious despite himself. Keanu turned the book to show the cover, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. "Have you read it?" Keanu asked. Julian shook his head. I haven't had the pleasure. It's about a man's journey to find himself, Keanu explained, his voice taking on a thoughtful quality. He explores wealth, sensuality, asceticism, all the extremes, before discovering that wisdom comes from balancing experience with inner peace. Julian nodded as though he understood the philosophical implications, though literary discussions weren't typically part of his client interactions. It sounds profound, he offered, unsure what else to say. I've read it maybe 15 times over the years, Keanu said. Find something new each time. He held the book out. Would you like to borrow it? I've finished my reread. Julian stared at the offered book, momentarily frozen by the unexpectedness of the gesture. An elite-tier client offering him, the service provider, a personal possession? This violated every unspoken hierarchy that structured his professional world. That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. Please, Keanu insisted gently. Books should be shared. Reluctantly, Julian accepted the worn paperback, noting the dog-eared pages and marginalia in pencil. This was clearly a beloved personal copy, not something casually discarded. Thank you, Julian said, feeling strangely touched by the gesture. I'll return it to the Excellence Aviation office for your next flight. Keanu shook his head. It's yours now. Pass it along when you're done if you'd like. That's how ideas travel. Julian clutched the book awkwardly, unsure how to process this disruption of the client-service provider dynamic. That's extremely generous, Mr. Reeves. Keanu, please, the actor corrected gently. Keanu, Julian repeated, the informality feeling strange on his tongue in this professional context. A moment of silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but definitely unusual in Julian's carefully orchestrated client interactions. Finally, Julian's training reasserted itself. Can I bring you anything else? Perhaps some tea or a light meal? Tea would be nice, Keanu nodded. Thank you, Julian. The use of his name startled Julian slightly. Most elite-tier clients never bothered learning the names of staff, addressing them generically if at all. Julian nodded and retreated to the galley, where he asked Amara to prepare the requested tea. As the flight progressed, Julian found himself observing Keanu with increasing fascination. The actor spent time engaged in quiet conversation with his assistant about charitable initiatives, read his book, and at one point simply gazed out the window at the clouds below with what appeared to be genuine wonder, something Julian hadn't witnessed in an adult passenger in years. Most remarkably, Keanu treated every crew member with the same quiet respect, from Amara to the pilots when they emerged briefly from the cockpit. He asked their names, thanked them specifically for services rendered, and seemed genuinely interested in their responses to his casual questions about their work. About halfway through the flight, Julian was checking some details with Amara when he overheard a phone conversation Keanu was having, apparently with a film director. I understand the scheduling pressure, Keanu was saying, but the stunt team needs another week of preparation. I'd rather delay than risk anyone getting hurt. Julian pretended not to listen, but he was struck by the contrast between this conversation and those he typically overheard from celebrity clients, which usually involved demands, complaints, or self-aggrandizement. When they began their descent into New York, Julian approached Keanu one final time. We'll be landing at Teterboro in approximately 20 minutes, Mr. Keanu. Your car service has confirmed they're waiting, and our ground team will expedite your transfer. Keanu nodded. Thank you, Julian. The flight was perfect. Julian hesitated, then gestured to the book now tucked under his arm. And thank you again for this. It was unexpected but very much appreciated. A small smile crossed Keanu's face. Sometimes the unexpected gifts are the most meaningful ones. There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just talking about the book, and Julian felt a moment of clarity, as though seeing himself and his carefully constructed professional persona from the outside for the first time. I have a confession, Julian said suddenly, surprising himself with his candor. When I first saw you approaching the aircraft, I didn't think you were the client. I made assumptions based on your appearance that were completely wrong. I've been trying to make up for that mistake this entire flight. He hadn't planned to say any of this, and part of his brain was screaming that he was potentially jeopardizing his career. Elite-tier clients expected perfect service, not confessions of judgment from staff members. Keanu's expression softened. We all make judgments based on appearances. It's human nature. The question is whether we let those judgments define our interactions. In my position, I'm trained to recognize certain signifiers of status and wealth, Julian admitted. Designer labels, luxury accessories, specific mannerisms. When those aren't present, it throws off my entire approach. Keanu considered this thoughtfully. That makes sense for your work. But maybe the most valuable skill isn't identifying status markers, but seeing the person beneath them. Julian nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. I think you might be right. As the aircraft touched down on the Teterboro runway, Julian found himself contemplating how differently he might have approached this flight had he recognized Keanu immediately. Would he have been more authentic, less concerned with protocol, and more focused on genuine service? Once they had taxied to a stop and the door was opened, Julian stood near the exit to bid farewell to their distinguished passenger. As Keanu approached, he extended his hand. Thank you for the conversation, Julian. It was a pleasure. Julian shook his hand, noting the firm, unpretentious grip. The pleasure was mine, truly. As Keanu descended the air stairs to the waiting car, Julian watched him go with a strange mixture of emotions. For years, he had built his career around catering to the whims of the wealthy and famous, adapting himself to reflect their expectations and reinforce their sense of importance. It was a performance he had perfected, one that had earned him promotions and praise. Yet in just a few hours, Keanu Reeves, a man who could afford to behave with maximum entitlement, had demonstrated a completely different way of moving through the world. No demands for special treatment, no need for constant affirmation of his status, no performance of importance, just authentic presence and genuine consideration for others. As Excellence Aviation's ground crew efficiently unloaded the minimal luggage, Julian found himself opening the borrowed copy of Siddhartha, curious about the wisdom that had captivated someone like Keanu through multiple readings. The first page held a handwritten quote that wasn't from the novel itself. The true measure of a person isn't found in how they treat those they need something from, but in how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Julian closed the book and watched as Keanu's car pulled away, the actor giving a final wave to the ground crew who had loaded his bags. In an industry built on hierarchy, exclusivity, and the careful maintenance of barriers between the extraordinary and the ordinary, Keanu Reeves had somehow remained untouched by the isolating effects of fame and fortune. As Julian boarded the aircraft for the return flight to Los Angeles, he slipped Siddhartha into his jacket pocket, feeling as though he'd been given much more than just a dog-eared paperback. In the world of elite-tier services, where Julian spent his days anticipating the desires of the privileged before they even expressed them, he had unexpectedly encountered something far more valuable than luxury or status, a glimpse of what it meant to remain fundamentally unchanged by circumstance, whether fortunate or challenging. The next day, when Julian arrived at Excellence Aviation's offices for his shift, he found a small package waiting for him at reception. Inside was a hardcover collection of Hermann Hesse's works with a simple note, "For Julian, the journey continues." Julian stood motionless, the book heavy in his hands, as colleagues bustled around him preparing for another day of catering to the elite. For the first time since joining Excellence Aviation, he found himself wondering about the ground crew workers he passed every day without really seeing, the mechanics whose names he'd never bothered to learn, the cleaning staff who entered and exited the luxurious aircraft like shadows. He tucked the book carefully into his bag, thinking about the man worth hundreds of millions who wore scuffed boots and carried a worn backpack, who remembered names and asked genuine questions, who cared more about his stunt team's safety than his filming schedule. And he wondered what other lessons might be waiting, hidden in plain sight, if he could learn to truly see the people around him rather than just the markers of their status. As Julian prepared for his next elite-tier client, a tech billionaire known for his exacting demands and hair-trigger temper, he found himself smiling slightly at the thought of the unexpected education he'd received at 40,000 feet. Some of life's most important lessons, it seemed, came from the most unexpected teachers, in the most unexpected moments, even in the rarefied air of a luxury private jet, where authenticity was usually the scarcest resource of all. 2 months later, Julian Mercer submitted his resignation to Excellence Aviation. The management team, surprised by the departure of one of their most promising client relations managers, offered him a substantial raise and accelerated promotion timeline. Julian declined politely but firmly. When asked about his future plans during his exit interview, Julian simply smiled and said he was taking some time to read more widely and think more deeply about what kind of work would truly fulfill him. His last day at Excellence Aviation, Julian did something he'd never done before in 2 years of employment. He walked through the maintenance hangar and shook hands with each member of the ground crew, asking their names and thanking them personally for keeping the aircraft, and by extension his clients, safe and comfortable. As he left the facility for the final time, his security badge turned in and his Armani suit exchanged for simple jeans and a comfortable shirt. Julian carried with him a well-read copy of Siddhartha and the quiet certainty that the most valuable lessons of his career had come not from the luxury training programs or client management seminars he'd attended, but from a brief encounter with a man who had everything the world could offer and had somehow managed to remain genuinely himself. And in a world increasingly defined by appearances, performances, and curated personas, Julian couldn't think of a more countercultural or revolutionary achievement than that.